So you can see here we have cleaned up the bottom, and that's really going to create a lot of good airflow and sun flow, and it's also going to create a lot of space for us to do succession planting. As you can see, we have also planted these other seedlings of tomatoes. It's going to create more airflow and sun for them as well, and we want to make sure that as this matured tomato dies off, we're going to have the succession of these tomatoes coming up. So not only do we do succession planting using that space below the tomato plants that have matured, we also do quite a lot of companion planting as well, so which is quite beneficial with the polyculture environment that we have created. So we grow quite a lot of kangkung, we have a bunch of chili plants and also marigolds and a bunch of parsley as well that you can see. And what this really does is creating this polyculture environment. We have a biodiversity in our garden. They're just like a rainforest, and that really controls a lot of the pests for us. It creates a good environment for a lot of the bees to come in as well, and that's something that we really encourage other gardeners to do as well. So you grow a wide variety of plants as much as possible. We want to make sure that we train these plants quite early to start climbing up a trellis. We have created these trellis, and I will have a video talking about this as well, how we create our trellis using recycle method. These are all recycled plastics and strings that we have found through grocery bags. We really cut them up and create these nice trellis across, and we use these natural wood branches to support them. So we don't buy anything to do with the trellis at all, and we just recycle these products to create the nice trellis. But I will have a separate video on how to create that. Now with the trellis training, we want to make sure we do this quite early with the tomato plants, as we have done here. The reason being, just like we train our children to walk, our babies to walk, that's what we want to do with our plants. If they start to fall over, like you can see this tomato plant, which I'm going to set up a trellis system for, has started to droop over, and you can see it's already starting to fruit itself. So it's quite key that I really support it on the trellis and it doesn't droop over. The risk is that you're going to lose the fruit. The branches can also break off, and it also leads to a lot of diseases. As it falls off, the leaves start to clump up, and you might catch many of the fungal diseases within the tomato plant. So you want to make sure that it's well trained to really climb over these trellis quite early. I wanted to come to this determinate kind of tomato that we are growing here. You can see clearly that this leaf has also caught a little bit of that disease as well, and it would be good to clip this off. So I will do that. And any of these leaves that have diseases, what I would always suggest is to really go for ensuring you burn them, you dry them and burn them. And the other option is to really go for hot composting to kill it off. There are going to be a lot of gardeners who generally tend to burn these leaves, and they don't do hot composting with them because they're quite worried that it can carry the disease through the compost themselves. But I have never had that issue myself. I find that once the compost reaches the temperature around 140, 150 degrees, nothing really survives through that. None of the seeds that I find from the grasses or from the food waste that we have in our house, or any of these diseased leaves carry over to the compost. So it really depends on your composting method and the way you want to use it, but a safe way is always to go for hot composting or to really dry and burn these diseased leaves themselves. Now with these tomato plants, what you also want to make sure is that you set up good airflow. You make sure that they're also climbing up the trellis quite well. They are being watered well, and we do all that bottom pruning that I was talking about as well to make sure that none of that soil is really splashing up those leaves themselves. But in the worst case scenario, when you do have a pest problem, what we suggest with the tomato plants is to really use any of the organic ways of pest control. And we're going to be posting a video on how to make some of those natural and organic sprays. We have many options. One is using neem oil. You can also use bicarbonate soda with oil and soap. You can also use chili soap oil mix. There's milk and water mix that you can use with soap. And then there's also the copper spray that you can use for these plants themselves. I particularly do not like the copper spray itself because it's not really organic. And what I would say is that all of these options are still much better than using a pesticide that creates a lot of chemicals within the food themselves. So that's on the pest control. What I want to also talk about is the watering for the plants themselves. So with these tomato seedlings, we want to make sure that the ground is always quite moist, and you can check that with just plugging in your thumb and seeing if the ground is quite moist, then it's good to go. If you feel that it's quite dry, what you want to do is make sure that you gently water these seedlings, and you want to make sure that the soil is again not splashing on any of these leaves, so you have to be quite gentle with the seedlings. What you want to make sure is that you water the seedlings much more than the mature tomato plants. The reason being that these seedlings don't have a very developed root system that can really tap into the deep water that we have already done on a weekly basis, the deep watering method, and we'll talk about it in a separate video. But that's really just to say that they don't have a very developed root system, so they dry out quite fast, and you want to make sure that you are regularly watering these seedlings. The other thing to really ensure is that you don't overwater. So you don't want to have a waterlog system where the water is always sitting in the soil, and that can be quite detrimental for these tomato plants because you can really create a fungal infection due to all the water that has been sitting there for a while. Really do a lot of control around protecting these babies from critters that you might have in your neighborhood. Good examples would be possums or rats or rabbits who might actually eat many of these tomato sucklings that you have here. So it's quite key that you protect them either through wire mesh, which is probably the best way to do it, or the other way would be to really use some sort of gauges and cages around the plant themselves. For us, we don't really have that issue here in Kenya, so we don't really do a lot of that protection, and they do quite well. The other thing to note, and this is quite interesting when I read and learned about it, is the fact that when these tomato plants, they grow up to 1 feet, after that they actually become quite toxic to all the critters, so you don't have to worry about any of those protection issues. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and do not forget to hit the like and subscribe button if you're enjoying these videos, and let's get to the tomato world. Thanks a lot, guys. See you next time.